So now let's look at World War II. One of the basic arguments that always comes into World War II in terms of how the war started is this issue of appeasement. And appeasement is the act of giving in a little to maintain peace. And this is all brought up in terms of the actions of Great Britain and of France, in terms of how they interacted with Mussolini, but more specifically Hitler. The idea, if they didn't appease Hitler, if they didn't give in to his demands for the Sudetenland, if they didn't basically allow the Anschluss with Austria, the annexation of Austria, if they maybe were a little bit better in terms of their diplomatic relations with Stalin, then World War II would not have happened. There's a lot of underlying tension during the appeasement that this temporary peace would not last. And what we then have to understand is what exactly is going on in the late 1930s. Could World War II have been prevented, or does it seem like it was always going to happen? So first we need to look at the Axis powers. Exactly why did they join together? What were their common goals? And the Axis powers composed of Germany, Italy, and Japan. And the interesting thing is that Japan and Italy were actually part of the Triple Entente, the Allies, who were joined with France and Great Britain and Russia during World War I. The reason why Italy and Japan decided to change sides is because they feel that their countries were not given enough or were not rewarded enough in terms of their service. And so they see more of an inclination to really join with Germany and the idea of this overarching territory. So Germany is after expansion through Europe. Italy is focusing on an African empire. Japan is looking for a pan-Asian empire, so they want to spread influence in Asia. And so there are also a number of secret treaties. Germany has a secret treaty with Spain. Germany and Russia also have a secret treaty. These are treaties of non-aggression. Germany promises that they will not invade Spain, they will not invade Russia if those countries promise to not aid Germany's enemies during the war. And they're going to be getting something out of it. Particularly the treaty between Russia and Germany, there is a plan to split up Poland after Germany promises to take control. So the alliances between the Allied powers are really more military alliances. But there's very little intervention in all terms. For example, Germany is going to be helping Italy in Africa. Japan will find their allies backing them up after the United States declares war against Japan. Germany and Italy will, of course, step forward and say, we're going to declare war against the United States as well. But that just makes common sense. There's no way the United States were going to just have a war inside the Pacific. Germany and Italy knew that the United States would also be turning towards the European front, and therefore they would have to declare war eventually. So it's going to sort of be a question that I'm leaving up to you in terms of could World War I have been prevented? In terms of appeasement, Britain, France, no one is really fit for another war. They have not industrialized. Really, it's Germany that has the military edge on all of them. And also, again, we're looking at this from hindsight. We're looking at this from the understanding that we know more about Hitler now than many of the European intelligence officials knew at that time. Now, the war itself, the wars on both fronts are going to proceed far more rapidly than European allies could have guessed. Germany ends up flying through Europe with military occupation or facing capitulations from these governments. Italy ends up stalling in Africa in terms of expanding their African empire, but they are still going to be a massive concern for France and for Great Britain as they begin moving into French and British colonies. And so Britain is going to find itself divided between Africa and Europe. Japan is moving through Korea and China, Vietnam, and the islands of the Pacific at an absolutely rapid pace. And as they're doing this, they're of course requiring um, vast amounts of raw materials, namely oil and tin, to continue this. And one of their biggest importers was the United States. And of course, one of their biggest rivals in the Pacific is the United States. And this is really what leads to the bombing of Pearl Harbor, viewing the United States as their primary opponent in Pacific imperialism. And of course, as a response to this, stopping the importation of raw materials. And one general happens to remark after the bombing of Pearl Harbor that he fears they have awakened a sleeping dragon. That the United States at this time has been remaining out of the primary conflict as much as possible. And yet, the United States definitely has the ability to really move into this war at a fervent pace. Despite the bombing of Pearl Harbor and despite some German submarine activity off the Atlantic coast, there is very little done in terms of economic devastation within the United States. And this is really going to be the United States' main contribution along with the Soviet Union. The fact that they have the industrial capacity to give to the Allies, the fact they have continuous fresh troops to give to the Allies. And as Russia joins the Allies after Germany invades in 1943 after Operation Barbarossa, this is going to be probably Hitler's biggest mistake. The fact that he's now fighting a two-front war very similar to World War I. And the fact that he's now surrounded by two massive industrial giants in which he cannot penetrate, he cannot affect. So it's really long-term planning and industrialization that helps win World War II. And the emergence of the United States and the accessibility of tools to continue the war. Now, the peace treaty that's going to emerge after World War II is going to become very fraught with tension between the major players, between Great Britain, between the United States, and between the Soviet Union. And yet there is definitely an awareness of the problems that were made in 1918 and 1919. And so the decision to split up, to give contributions, to really rebuild Europe, to rebuild Japan, and to keep watch on all these areas that were economically devastated. That's really their plan to try and hopefully prevent World War III. And yet this tension between the communists, between the capitalists, between the United States and its allies, between the Soviet Union and its allies, their alliance that they had between each other was really only strong when they had a common enemy, when they had to defeat Germany. But with Germany defeated, the relations between these two powers have not become any stronger. They're still viewed with a great deal of suspicion. And it's with this very tense relationship that we're going to leave World War II and then dive into the Cold War.